Massachusetts Congressman Richard Neal is our guest this morning. Let's go on the record. The chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee pressing the case for Democrats to hold their majority. But will the midterm elections bring a seismic shift? The chairman joins us at the table. Let's go on the record.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
Welcome to OTR, everyone. I'm Ed Harding, along with News Center 5's political reporter Janet Wu. It's great to have you with us this morning. Election day is a little now more than a week away, and already millions of votes have already been cast all across the nation. And we're pleased, as you can see, to have Congressman Richard Neal with us at the table for a deep dive into the crucial election cycle. As you know, Democrat representing the state's first congressional district, first taking office in 1989, candidate for re-election. He is currently chairman of the House and Ways and Means Committee. He holds degrees from American International College and the University of Harvard. Mr. Chairman, it's great to have you with us. Thank you for your time.
Nice to be with you, and nice to be with you, Janet.
So much to talk about. One of the last things to actually happen this week was the appeals court ruling. You're one step closer to getting Donald Trump's tax returns. So if you look at the recent rulings from the Supreme Court, how confident are you that the Supreme Court will agree with this week's appeals court ruling in your favor, or do you think that the former president can run the clock on this one, waiting for the election?
Well, I think it's very clear that they've attempted to run the election, but at the same time, I think it's important to remind ourselves that there are now 3 federal courts that have affirmed the position of the Ways and Means Committee. And we believe that the position that we've offered is not only sound legally, but that it's consistent with the fact that successive presidents now since Richard Nixon have all released their tax forms. So I'll refrain from any specific discussion of the federal case. But I do believe, as I did from day one, that this would eventually make its way to the Supreme Court.
And if he does run the clock out and you move on to the next cycle, and let's say the Republicans do take over the House, is this issue forever forgotten, or at least for the next couple of years?
I don't think that's the case, and I won't say much more.
Okay.
All right, Congressman. As you know, it's 9 days before election, so I'm not sure it's the right phraseology, so forgive me if it's not, but how prepared are you to take a back seat again if Republicans do win control of the House?
Well, I'm hardly prepared to take a back seat.
That's right.
I mean, not after all these years, I can tell you that.
Right.
I think that the better answer here is that now normative patterns are taking place in the election cycle. People are reverting to their previous habits of how they're going to vote. There still is a significant chunk of people, independents. They tend to be suburban. The focus, as you know, universally is almost on the Philadelphia suburbs, independent women, what they're going to do. But what's interesting to me is that the generic polling has now settled out. And the difficulty with the generic polling, Ed, is that it says you're going to vote for a Democrat or Republican. We have superb candidates, and they have been in the past in districts that they were not supposed to win, and they've won. And in most of those cases, right now, they're ahead or at least even. So I remain optimistic. I want people to tell me on the other side who's going to lose. What Democrats are going to lose. And when you go to that specific, they don't have a very firm case.
So you haven't lost faith. I mean, you
not at
genuinely
all.
Believe
Not at all. I think that our candidates, not only have they been able to grind it out in the past, but they're well funded. They prepared for this. And I think that the 2 races in New Hampshire that come to mind, whether it's Chris Pappas or Annie Kuster, I think they're both going to win.
You've been watching, especially those races that are kind of close, very closely. I know the first thing you do when you get up, you wake up in the morning and you look at the numbers every single day. But when you look at these races, do you think it is abortion, Donald Trump, rising prices at grocery stores and the gas stations, or is it individual personalities in the end that will determine the outcomes of these races, especially the key critical races that you're looking at?
Sure. So part of it is perception, part of it is reality, but there's also, I think, a key consideration, and that is if you're a member of Congress, who you continue to do your homework, and you get out there and you return phone calls, you do all of the things that members of Congress have done along the way. You pay attention, good constituent service and all of that. You can, even in terms of a national trend, you can build a firewall. And I think that if you look at the case of Congresswoman Slotkin in Michigan, that's precisely what's going to happen. Congresswoman Spanberger in Virginia, I think that's what's going to happen. So you can take these nominal districts, or districts even lean against you, as is the case with Dan Kildee in Michigan. He is likely to win. There are 3 races in Nevada. I think all of those cases, those examples are based upon not only have they been pretty good office holders, but they've done the necessary fundraising and the availability.
It looks like we have a pretty tight race just south of our border in Rhode Island. Any predictions on how you see that playing out?
No, but I am aware of the fact that in the past, Rhode Island has had a history. When I first went to Congress, there was a Republican senator and a Republican House member. But I also think that we're in pretty decent shape there for late breakers. So there are a number of people that have not made up their minds. And it would be, I think, very difficult for Democrats to argue that they've made a case for holding the majority and then lose a seat in Rhode Island. So I would probably like to balance that out with what I think is Chris Pappas's position in New Hampshire, where I think Chris is going to win.
What about the upper chamber? Are you more or less pessimistic about Democrats keeping control of the Senate?
I think that it really is close to 50-50. I do think that there are three races that come to mind, not the least of which is Arizona. Pennsylvania comes to mind for sure. And that debate this week, I hope, will contribute to settling things out. We have a 2-to-1 majority, Democrat versus Republican, in the state of Pennsylvania. But culturally, there are parts of Pennsylvania that are quite conservative.
You're talking about the Fetterman-Oz debate during the week.
That's right. And I think that people can read into that what they want, but at the same time also understanding the challenges that those who are disabled might feel. And I think that in the case of Fetterman, anybody who knows about family members or others who have strokes, you can recover. It's a question of how long it takes.
You said three races. Is the third one Ohio, or is there another
Ohio,
one?
yes.
Right,
Yeah, I'm
between
focused
Tim
on
Ryan.
Ohio. Tim Ryan has really run by all national objectives. A spectacular race. He's getting sorts of credit even from Republicans who have said that they did not see this coming against J.D. Vance. But I have known Tim Ryan for a long time. He is Ohio.
How badly did House Progressives stumble this past week by releasing a letter urging President Biden to negotiate with Russia, then pulling the letter back a day later? Is there long-term damage? Is there long-term damage, and doesn't it sort of play into the GOP playbook?
Well, I disagree with them sharply on that issue. I think that President Zelensky has been an inspiration to the world, coupled with the fact that I think Joe Biden has handled this correctly. His ability to rally Western Europe, Eastern Europe, the Baltic nations come to mind. What happened in Crimea was a table setter for what Putin has in mind. This argument that Putin is making, that suggesting, for example, that somehow Ukraine is part of Russia, there is no historical reference to that I'm aware of, coupled with the fact that when you look at the response now from the Baltic nations, the idea that the Swedes and the Finns are joining NATO, that's the real story. So I think America should stay on the side of President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people.
But going back to my original question, do you think what the progressives did, what they then pulled back, is sort of plays into the GOP playbook in the sense that they can say that, well, there's a divide in the Democratic Party on how we should handle this?
I think there were enough of us on the Democratic side to rebut that, and we did.
The Massachusetts delegation is asking the White House for better access to money supporting the growing number of migrants that are coming into many states, including Massachusetts. Yeah. And this includes a group that arrived in Kingston this past week. There were some migrant families in the group of people that had arrived in Kingston. So considering the far larger crisis closer to the southern border, is the president listening?
Ed, we are going to continue to have this battle over immigration in America until there's a national solution. The reality is that we need immigration. When you look at labor participation rates, when you look at fertility rates, just trying to get people to take the spots of those who are retiring is a compelling story. But at the same time, continuing to hector each other in America over what ought to be a routine, sound part of American policy, we need a solution. Open borders is not a solution. Mm-hmm. We need to understand that there needs to be a path to citizenship, but people need to be able to go through the formative stage, as President Obama suggested, about get in line. And that's the way that we need to do this.
But do you think that there is enough money for agencies here in Massachusetts trying to help the migrants coming in to actually get money in light of the need that's closer to the border, to the southern border?
Probably not. I think that immigration is a national challenge. It's a national problem, and I think that it's going to require a national response.